The Planet of the Apes trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. It's one of those rare instances where I don't think there's a weak link in this entire franchise. And not only that, but each movie builds upon the movie that came before it in a big and beautiful way. And with that being said, I thought that this trilogy ended beautifully. I didn't really see the need for this franchise to continue. I actually appreciated and respected Fox for just leaving well enough alone to not cause burnout. Something that studios today seem to not like doing. But then Disney bought Fox and they announced a new Planet of the Apes movie, and I just saw it last night. I saw the earliest possible showing that I could in my state. I got this really cool poster, and I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys now that I've let the movie linger in my brain for a few hours. I'm going to review the film. It will be spoiler free, but before I do that, subscribe. I talk about movies all the time on this page, but I also talk about TV shows and video games. I talk about video games a lot. So I went into this film while standing at a weird crossroad in my mind. Half of my brain didn't think that this franchise could live up to what Matt Reeves did with Dawn and War. Those movies, while having a lot of CGI and a lot of great action sequences and being about apes versus humans, they're not really blockbusters in the traditional sense of what we think of when we think of blockbusters. At the end of the day, those movies are very slow. They're very methodical. They're character studies and they're dramas about Caesar and his leadership and his reign and all of the struggles that he goes through trying to help apes and humans alike. And I was worried that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes wouldn't really have known what made that trilogy so good, what made that trilogy so important to fans of it. And I thought this movie was just going to be an action blockbuster in all senses of the word and not in a good way. But the other half of my brain was just so damn excited to get back into this universe. I was frothing at the mouth at the possibility that maybe this movie would continue the franchise in a positive way. And I'm happy to say that by the time the credits rolled, I was blown away. I think that this movie did practically everything that it was supposed to do to not only respect the trilogy that came before it, but to be a perfectly strong foundation for a franchise to be built upon it leading forward. So let's talk about the story a little bit. What is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes about? I'm going to give you a brief synopsis here, but I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything. The film centers on Noah, who's a young ape, and he's part of an isolated tribe of apes. But when tragedy strikes his home, he's forced to go on this adventure to parts of the world that he otherwise never would have went to. And on that adventure, he learns a lot about the world that he never knew. He meets other apes, he meets other clans, he meets some humans, and he realizes that there's more to the world that he ever would have expected otherwise. He learns about the long and complex history of apes and humans, but more importantly, he learns about Caesar, his teachings, and what he did for apes and humans alike, and how his teachings, even though largely forgotten to time, are possibly needed now more than ever. And this film does such a good job at making it clear that it owes so much to the trilogy that came before it. It doesn't do what a lot of modern continuations of franchises does, which is just flip off the installments that came before it in an attempt to be completely wholly unique or original. It respects the trilogy in so many ways, not only within the narrative and the plot and the characterization, but in the technical aspects of the movie too, but I'll talk about that later. Like I said, this film has the main character of Noah go on an adventure, and that adventure is probably my favorite aspect of this entire film. I love when the stories that I consume feel like true, genuine, earned adventures. I love when we, as the viewer or the reader or the player, whatever medium it happens to be in an adventure story, I love when it makes us feel like we are alongside the main characters going on this journey. I hate when a movie is marketed as an adventure, but the adventure aspects fall short. It happens far too often these days. For example, I'm going to go on a side tangent here, but I love the MCU. I am an MCU fanboy, and I really liked the Moon Knight show. But in the marketing for Moon Knight, it was described as a adventure. It was described as the MCU's version of Indiana Jones. And in a way, it is, on paper at least. But not in the way that matters, which is presentation. On paper, Moon Knight goes on an adventure. He goes from country to country, he treks through the desert, he goes into tombs, he solves riddles, he finds objects. It has all the ingredients of an adventure, but it never really felt that way because the series didn't really do a good job of making us feel like we you were going on that adventure alongside him. It just felt too quick in the narrative and in the editing. It often feels like a montage, and I know I just targeted Moon Knight, but I can say the exact same thing about so much media these days. But I'm so happy to say that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes does not have that problem at all. The adventure aspect feels real. We feel like we are alongside Noah, going on this adventure every step of the way. Each revelation of this world, of this narrative, feels real, it feels earned, and it feels impactful. Even to the small details and the small scenes. For example, there's this scene, no spoilers here, but there's this scene where the characters are trying to get into this location, but they can't get in through the door. So they decide to climb up this mountain and go in through the top. And the way that scene is directed just feels so real. I love it. When they're climbing up, the waves splashing alongside the mountain, the way they get in, the direction of the location that they're in once they get there. I know I sound like a broken record here, but again, it feels like you are alongside these characters doing what they're doing. Where some lesser director would show them look up to where they're trying to get, and then it would cut to them inside, and you would just get the implication. I want to talk about the characters now a little bit. When it comes to the characters, this is where this film very easily could have been weak, especially when compared to the original trilogy. Because again, I love Rise, I love Dawn, I love War, but those films are very much elevated by Caesar as a character, not only in the writing, but with Andy Serkis's incredible performance. And I have to say, the characters in Kingdom are good. I liked them for the most part. Noah is a likable character, and he only gets even more likable as the story progresses. And the same can be said for the whole supporting cast as well. But with that being said, none of them reached the levels of Caesar, not even close, at least in my opinion. And the lack of a character as compelling as Caesar was noticeable to me, and that was a bit unfortunate. But that's saying more about how much I love Caesar than it's me saying anything negative about the characters here. Again, they're still well written, they're still well performed, the acting is phenomenal, and they are incredibly likable, but not nearly as likable as Caesar. By the time this film got around to its second act, I had to tell myself that, okay, it's clear I'm not going to like any of these characters as much as Caesar, but just enjoy them for who they are and what they are. And then when I did that, the movie got even more enjoyable than it already was. Now I want to talk about more of the technical aspects of the film. The direction and tone of this movie is phenomenal. It's not as slow, it's not as methodical, it's not as dramatic as the Matt Reeves movies, but it's also not a full action blockbuster either. It kind of finds the perfect balance between those two things. This is definitely the biggest feeling Planet of the Apes movie yet, from the cast to the plot to the action sequences to the implications of the narrative. Again, it definitely has the most action sequences, and at times it often has the lightest tone as well. And if someone didn't like the Matt Reeves movies because of the pacing and the tone, which a lot of people didn't, and I understand why they didn't, I actually think there's a 100% chance they could like this one. It's that different at times. But again, this film is far from Disney-ified. This is not an MCU movie with a Planet of the Apes skin, but it's still the most casual, friendly movie of the franchise so far. But that doesn't mean that this movie can't be methodical. That doesn't mean that it can't take its time. It absolutely does. There's so many small character beats, so many small character moments that I really appreciated in this movie that other films would have just brushed right past. It takes its time to tell its story. It takes its time with the characters, and because it does that, it makes the action sequences even better. Again, the action sequences in this movie are phenomenal. Every time there's an action scene, it focuses on the emotion of the characters in that action scene, which is the best way to do action. But to summarize those thoughts, because I feel like I just rambled incoherently for 5 minutes, this movie feels like it's 50% a continuation of the Matt Reeves movies in terms of tone and pacing, but it also feels 50% like a Disney action blockbuster, but not in a bad way. A Disney action blockbuster at its best. Now I want to mention something else. This might be considered a small, tiny spoiler. I don't think it is. It's not about the plot or anything, just fair warning here. But if I had to give this movie a genuine critique, a nitpick, it would be that I didn't really like the way that the apes acted in this movie, it was very different from the Caesar trilogy. In the Caesar trilogy, not many apes talked, and the apes that talked had very broken English. In this movie, every ape talks, and every ape talks very, very well. Now, I know there's probably a lore reason for this, which is perfectly understandable. I was saying to myself in my mind while watching it that the simian flu probably keeps evolving, and with each new generation of apes, they get smarter and smarter and smarter. That's probably the case. But it was still a little jarring for me to see the apes act so human, not only in the way they were talking, but also their mannerisms. In the Caesar trilogy, it felt like apes acting very human. In this movie, it feels like humans acting like apes, and that is a little unfortunate for me, but you get over it eventually because everything else is so good, and that's also probably just a me thing. That's probably just a personal opinion. Other people might like the way the apes act in this a lot more than the Caesar trilogy. But anyway, I was incredibly satisfied with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It blew past my expectations in every sense. It's very easily a film of the year contender for me. I already bought the original movie poster. I'm gonna frame it. It's gonna hang on my wall for quite some time now. It's not a perfect movie though. I do have critiques, I do have nitpicks, but in terms of just big budget blockbusters, it's one of the best that we've gotten in a long time. And I really, really hope that this movie performs well at the box office because it deserves, in my mind, to sit alongside films like Dune Part 2 and The Batman and Avatar Way of Water as a way to show studios that big budget blockbusters can be slow. They can be smart, they can be methodical, and they can take their time. Not everything needs to follow the MCU formula. Anyway, have you seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes yet? If you have, let me know what you've thought about it in the comments. I'm really curious if people are liking it as much as me. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.